Hey friends, this is part 2 in Introduction to Fractions. In the first lesson, we talked about what fractions were, and we found out that a fraction is just an amount that describes part of a whole. It's not the whole thing, it's part of a whole. We had to have some way to describe that amount, right? Like this is part of a whole that's shaded in. We also talked about the denominator a little bit yesterday. We started to really investigate that, and that's what I want to focus in on today. The denominator is the number that you see on the bottom of a fraction or down below. Some people remember denominator because it's down on the bottom side. But let's really figure out what it is. Where does that, in order for us to know what information a denominator gives us, let's figure out where it comes from in the first place. So if I was to ask you what amount this was, what fractional name or label would you give to this amount? I bet all of you could say, oh, this was, so that's 1/3. Well, how'd you get that 3? Really think about it. You had to consider the whole amount, then you saw how many equal parts the whole was divided into, and then you saw that the amount we were discussing or trying to show was 1. If it was this amount of the whole, you would probably say, oh, that's 2 of the 3 parts the whole is divided into. So let's try this one. Let's keep naming some of these parts, labeling these parts so we find more where the denominators are coming from. What would you name this part? You probably call that 1/6, and you'd be correct. It's 1 of the 6 parts the whole is made from or divided into. How about this amount? How would I describe that amount? I can't say it's 1 because it's really not just one whole something, because I'm considering this to be the whole amount. This grouping is the whole. This is representing a part of the whole. How would I describe that? How would I tell anyone what it was? I'd consider that there's 10 in the whole group, and that's 1 of them. So that's 1/10. And here on a number line, I'm going to try to find out where a whole is, and I see that's 1 whole. From here to here is 1 whole. I see that it's been divided into 4 equal parts, and we're talking about 1 of them, so I would describe that as 1/4. Now, if I were creating fractions, I think I would have written the denominator like that: 1/4, 1/10, 1/6. And can you think of why I would love it if it was labeled like that? I think it would maybe make it easier for students to begin thinking about fractions. Does anyone figure it out? Well, it's because the denominator is really a label giving us information, telling us how many parts the whole has been divided into. And that's really, really important. And that's great information. And that's why when I see a fraction, I pretty much always start with the denominator. Okay, how many parts is the whole divided into? Oh, and I have 1 of them. So even though we think to read it like this, we say 1/4, of course. But when I'm really trying to analyze my fraction, I focus in on that denominator. And one of the reasons that's going to be important to you is for when you're adding fractions, like 1/4 plus 1/4. Oftentimes, watch what I see lots of times I see 2/8. And that is not correct. It's not 2/8. 1/4 and another 4th. That would be 2/4, right? It's not the same as 2/8 because an 1/8 would be smaller. It's actually 4/8. But what happened here, if this student had remembered that that was just a label giving them information they needed about the fraction, 1/4 plus another 4th, they'd realize that it was 2 of the 4ths. So let's try to think of our denominator as a label, giving us really, really important information for us as we are analyzing and working with fractions. So keep that in mind, and we'll take it from there.